Okay, so here we go again. We've got 3.3.3, which is the hydrosphere water supply in arid countries. This is a little bit of stuff again that we have already kind of touched on in the case study projects. However, it is a major part of the A syllabus, so I do want to go over a few things when it comes to how we get water in arid countries. Arid meaning dry. Countries that don't have a good amount of rain have a lot of drought throughout the year, and so their water supply doesn't get recharged like ours will here in Florida, where our groundwater is continually recharged by lots of rain and flowing water. So water resources in arid and semi-arid areas are very scarce due to low rainfall and high evaporation, like I just said. So basically, this is bringing down the amount of water not only for people in their houses, but also for industry and for their food growing, for their agriculture. Um, so in many places, people have overdrawn water for these issues, and this has exacerbated the problem so that local vegetation won't even grow. Um, Groundwater in places can be an alternative if you can find it, but there are places where aquifers just don't exist, where there's not an underground supply of water. So people have to come up with alternatives. One alternative is desalination or desalinization, and this is the process of removing salt from seawater, from saline water, which makes up, as we remember from the beginning of the unit, makes up by far most of the Earth's water is saline or salty, right? So basically, this is the process of removal of salt from water. Water desalination has been practiced for more than 50 years in the Middle East. The Middle East is a very arid region because if it comes down to it, this is what you have to do to get fresh water. And that region accounts for almost half the global desalination capacity, with the Persian Gulf states having the most. There are three main methods of removing salt from water. These are thermal, electrical, and pressure. The methods differ in terms of their energy consumption and costs, and whether they can be used for seawater or just brackish water. So brackish would be a little less salty. The three most common desalination techniques in that region are called multi-stage flash, reverse osmosis, and multi-effect distillation. And you can learn about each of those by clicking those links. Just real quick, let's take a look at that. Multi-stage flash is going to be distillation, and this is going to be in multiple stages. You basically go in multiple stages, and distillation is basically where you take that water, that salty water, and you heat it up. And when you heat it up, the only thing that boils off is the water. So then you have to cool it down, and then it reliquefies. But when it reliquefies, it leaves the salt behind, and all you get is fresh water. It's cool. It's great. It works. It absolutely works. This is how we've made fresh water from salt water for forever. The Earth doesn't naturally, this is evaporation, basically that happens in our oceans. But the only problem is that when we do it here in large-scale operations, it's super energy intensive, and so it's going to use. The funny thing is that most of our energy processes use fresh water to heat steam to turn a turbine, like a coal-fired power plant. So you're using fresh water to make fresh water, and this can be a huge energy loss and water loss. So you're going to end up, even though you're making fresh water, you're going to be using a lot of energy. The next one on there was reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis is really cool. So when you talk about reverse osmosis, you've got basically a distillation with reverse osmosis, where not distillation, I'm sorry, but you've got desalination, where you pass, let's see, it's just a Wikipedia page, but you pass the water through a membrane. You can kind of see this diagram here. And the membrane only lets the water go through and keeps one side salty and the other side saline, but that saline side then gets saltier and saltier and saltier and saltier, and eventually you have to get rid of it. So this is cool because it uses those membrane, but you do have to change out those membranes, and that can get expensive, and creation of the membranes can be expensive, so there are drawbacks to that. It can be pretty expensive and use some pretty crazy materials. And all of these, a drawback is that you're going to be creating, no matter what, a lot of salt that's left behind, and then you have to store it. And where do you put it? Do you put it on the land? Well, that can harm the land with salty lands. Do you put it back in the ocean? Well, that can actually, if you put it back where you got it from, that can increase the salinity of the ocean, change the ocean currents, all kinds of stuff can go bad from there. So yeah. All right. And finally, the last one is multi-effect distillation. You can click the link and look on that. It's kind of like multi-stage flash. Again, it's a distillation technique. Definitely to get a better understanding, you do need to go onto the site and watch this video. This video is very good about how seawater desalination works, which is really, really cool. So some case studies about that. Malta. Malta has no rivers or lakes. 68% of Malta's water comes from groundwater, which is being exploited at a rate of almost 50% above the sustainable extraction level. So they're using, basically, if you're like, okay, we have 100, if we want to have this water for the future, and that's 100%, they're using 50% more of that. So they're actually reducing their amount of water that they have. So the balance in order to keep it, the country have enough water, it comes from seawater desalination, which consumes 7% of all the electricity used in the country. So look at that. In the country, 7% of the electricity, total electricity in the country, is used for desalination. It takes a lot of electricity to do that. You talk about in the whole country, if you're going to take a whole 7% and just for this one process, that's a crazy amount, right? And all of which that comes from the burning of fossil fuels and power stations. Malta gets its water from 2 sources, the groundwater, and 3 reverse osmosis desalination plants. So even though this is reverse osmosis and not a distillation plant, it's still using that much energy. At present, groundwater still accounts for 43% of the potable water supply, and the balance comes from the reverse osmosis plants. The most important users of desalinated water in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain, which uses 70% of worldwide capacity, and in North Africa. And we switch to America. The United States is one of the most important users of desalinated water in the MEDCs, especially California with their droughts, and even parts of Florida. There's a big desalination plant in Tampa. The cost, though, has kept desalination from being used more often. One other place is Israel, another MEDC, and they've made a big comeback from a massive water shortage using desalination as well. And this video is a really good case study on Israel and how they became a world leader in desalination, and I'd like you guys to watch that as well. And so that was a pretty quick one, but that's 3.3.3, and there you go. I just thought some of you may not know what Malta is. Malta is a small island off around Europe. That's why they don't have any of those water features. It is an MEDC, so when we talk about those, that's a MEDC definitely. That's why they can get all those RO plants. Most of the time with LEDCs, you're going to run into issues if you're going to use desalination of the cost being prohibitive there. That's not really the case in Malta, but that's also Malta, being the a small island, they have to get their fresh water from doing these types of processes.